welcome you to your 2022-23 online rules presentation. My name is Charlie Winsky, Deputy Commissioner at the South Carolina High School League. We're going to spend a few moments and walk you through about 13 different slides with basic generic rules that cover all of our sports to give you a foundation heading into this season. Coaching requirements. All coaches every year must take the NFHSLearn.com courses for concussion, heat acclimatization, sudden cardiac arrest, protecting students from abuse. This covers all varsity head coaches, assistants, and of course all head coaches of our JV, B, and middle school teams, as well as their assistants, paid and volunteer. All coaches every 2 years must complete the CPR AED certification. And then, of course, we're still recommending the COVID-19 course and the collapsed athlete course. Medical info are approved healthcare professionals that can return a student athlete to play. And this is a situation in contest where an athlete has been suspected or potentially shows signs of a concussion. These 5 healthcare professionals, provided they are licensed in South Carolina, are the ones who can administer any test or cognitive assessments to determine if the athlete can return to play. Those 5 there you see are an MD, a DO, an AT, a PA, or an MP. The athletic trainer, otherwise known as an AT, is probably going to be the most common one that you have around. Please, under no circumstance, if you do not have one of these 5 healthcare professionals available, do not return an athlete to play. Other medical information for you: wet bulb globe thermometers must be used at times of high heat and humidity. This would carry you through about mid to late fall and pick you back up in the early spring. Coaches, please be mindful. This can also be used in indoor facilities that do not have any central HVAC or working air conditioner. Physicals: athletes must have a physical dated April 1 of 2022 in order to be valid for this coming year. And please take a moment to share with your parents, especially your younger parents that are just coming in. Do not get a physical prior to April 1 of 2023 if they want it to be good for the following school year to wait. So help those parents out on the front end. Check your athletic director to make sure that you have an emergency action plan for your facility. This is required of all schools. However, it's very important that coaches take a moment to go through their emergency action plan so in the event an emergency takes place, you are fully capable of executing that action plan. Coaches, at this time I want to share with you as well, it's also a good idea to walk your student athletes through that emergency action plan. Spend a little bit of time with them understanding how to get emergency vehicles to certain places at your facility, what doors are best to use. This could be you that needs the emergency, and if your athletes are equipped to help someone, they could be potentially saving your life or getting you much needed medical assistance at a faster time. And of course, reminder for football coaches that immersion tubs or other similar cooling devices are required in the sport of football. Okay, ejection of athletes. First of all, please make sure that you submit an ejection report from the school. This should come from either the principal and or the athletic director, which means you need to notify them as soon as your contest is over that you've had someone ejected so they can get that report submitted to our office in a timely fashion. This also makes them aware that they're going to be dealing with a pending investigation to an ejected athlete, and that way their first contact from this office is not a very awkward conversation because they did not know someone was ejected. Athletes can remain in the bench area. Please do not let an official tell you they have to leave the bench or go to the locker room and or bus. This becomes a supervision issue for you as a coach. Of course, they are ineligible, which means they cannot return to play in that contest. And they'll remain ineligible until they have been cleared by this office or served this minimum suspension handed down. Of course, the minimums, you have a 1 game in football, swim, lacrosse, and cheer. In the sports of golf, volleyball, and wrestling, there is a 2 game or match suspension. And of course, it'll be a 3 match or game suspension in basketball, baseball, softball, tennis, and soccer. And of course, the ejection, as always, is served at the level the ejection occurs. This means if you have athletes that are bouncing up and down from the varsity to the sub-varsity level, they must sit out that sub-varsity level if that is where they were ejected. So if I have an athlete in basketball who was ejected from a JV contest, they would sit out the JV contest for the next 3 JV games before they could return to any contest at any level. Second ejection in the same sport equals a 2-week suspension. And in the playoffs, the minimum is reduced to the next game suspension. Please keep in mind, video all your contests. Video is often extremely helpful to our office in discerning what happened during the ejection. It also gives us a clearer picture, and in some cases, it has often helped the athlete's case to be able to say what we got in the report is not exactly what happened on the field of play. We've had situations where officials have said they have been bumped by an athlete, where video showed that if it happened was extremely minimal and helped the athlete out. Had there not been video in some of those situations, that athlete would have been looking at a much longer suspension than what they were even handed down. Please know these are the minimums. The league office reserves the rights to expand upon these minimums depending on the severity. I can tell you now, any profanity or negative comments directed to a game official by an athlete and or making contact with a game official is going to be much, much longer than the minimums. Okay, coaches, when you're ejected, first of all, you need to notify your principal and or AD that you or a member of your coaching staff was ejected. Of course, again, schools submit the ejection report to the league office. Coaches, you must leave the facility or stadium immediately and do not return until the contest is over and the officials have left the facility. You cannot return to coach until you have been cleared by the league office and or served the suspension handed to you. Of course, the minimum for coaches is 2 games and a $300 fine. And again, these suspensions are served at the level where the ejection occurs. For varsity coaches, this can often add games to the minimum. For example, if you take the sport of football, if a head varsity football coach were to be ejected from a JV game on a Thursday night, the minimum for that ejection is 2 games served at the JV level, which means that varsity head football coach will miss the next 2 Thursdays in addition to the 2 Friday games inside of those 2 Thursday games as well. It would be a grand total of a 4-game suspension, with 2 being collateral damage to the initial 2-game suspension. So please be mindful of this as you go down to the sub-varsity levels and work with athletes. I can tell you we do not have a lot of sympathy for sub-varsity coaches that are ejected due to the nature of sub-varsity educational-based athletics. This is a level where it is a developmental and training opportunity for your athletes, coaches, and officials. In no case are those games made about winning and losing solely. There should not be a situation where a coach becomes so irate at the officiating that they feel the need to be ejected. Please understand that at this level, at the sub-varsity level especially, calls are going to be missed. They're going to be missed at the varsity level, but they're going to be missed at the sub-varsity level. Many of your sub-varsity coaches are not as polished in terms of how to talk to game officials appropriately, and will push the envelope not really caring or knowing what comes next. Please have conversation with all of your sub-varsity coaches that the expectation from the league and hopefully from you and your school is that we have 0 sub-varsity coach ejections for the 2022-2023 season. And of course, if you're ejected from the final game of the season, the minimum fine is $500. Please understand that number can expand depending on the severity of your ejection. And in both cases, the money of the fine, you can never get your money's worth. Please do not try. Beginning this year, we have a new open period for all of our sports. We've gotten some calls from coaches about this. Please understand that nobody lost anything they had. You are being given an opportunity for more. Our fall sports, you have the period of March 1 through 31 and May 1 through 31 for your open season. Winter sports have the month of September and the month of April. And then spring sports, you have October 1 through 31, and you're again open January 1 through 25. Of course, as you remember, the previous open seasons, you had a grand total of 20 dates. Now you have an uncapped number during those open periods. So if I'm a spring sport coach in October and I want to go October 1 through 31 and practice every day for 31 straight days, that is certainly an opportunity you can take. A few reminders: you may not make any cuts during this open season periods. The only exception to this would be competitive cheer, who you now may hold your tryouts in May. Football, of course, you have 10 days in pads in May, and that is after your 3 dates in helmets only. In both boys and girls lacrosse, goalies may wear full gear during both open periods. And in boys lacrosse in the January period, you may be in helmets only for the first 5 days, and after the first 5 days, you can be in full gear. Again, this open period change gives an opportunity for expanded open seasons for sports, and was done through the Handbook Review Committee and was put in place by the full executive committee in April. Beginning this year, we have a new open period for all of our sports. We've gotten some calls from coaches about this. Please understand that nobody lost anything they had. You are being given an opportunity for more. Our fall sports, you have the period of March 1 through 31 and May 1 through 31 for your open season. Winter sports have the month of September and the month of April. And then spring sports, you have October 1 through 31, and you're again open January 1 through 25. Of course, as you remember, the previous open seasons, you had a grand total of 20 dates. Now you have an uncapped number during those open periods. So if I'm a spring sport coach in October and I want to go October 1 through 31 and practice every day for 31 straight days, that is certainly an opportunity you can take. A few reminders: you may not make any cuts during this open season periods. The only exception to this would be competitive cheer, who you now may hold your tryouts in May. Football, of course, you have 10 days in pads in May, and that is after your 3 dates in helmets only. In both boys and girls lacrosse, goalies may wear full gear during both open periods. And in boys lacrosse in the January period, you may be in helmets only for the first 5 days, and after the first 5 days, you can be in full gear. Again, this open period change gives an opportunity for expanded open seasons for sports, and was done through the Handbook Review Committee and was put in place by the full executive committee in April. Beginning this year, we have a new open period for all of our sports. We've gotten some calls from coaches about this. Please understand that nobody lost anything they had. You are being given an opportunity for more. Our fall sports, you have the period of March 1 through 31 and May 1 through 31 for your open season. Winter sports have the month of September and the month of April. And then spring sports, you have October 1 through 31, and you're again open January 1 through 25. Of course, as you remember, the previous open seasons, you had a grand total of 20 dates. Now you have an uncapped number during those open periods. So if I'm a spring sport coach in October and I want to go October 1 through 31 and practice every day for 31 straight days, that is certainly an opportunity you can take. A few reminders: you may not make any cuts during this open season periods. The only exception to this would be competitive cheer, who you now may hold your tryouts in May. Football, of course, you have 10 days in pads in May, and that is after your 3 dates in helmets only. In both boys and girls lacrosse, goalies may wear full gear during both open periods. And in boys lacrosse in the January period, you may be in helmets only for the first 5 days, and after the first 5 days, you can be in full gear. Again, this open period change gives an opportunity for expanded open seasons for sports and was done through the Handbook Review Committee and was put in place by the full executive committee in April. Of course, if you violate the closed season, you see the penalties here. These are all listed in the rules and regulations, and you can see the severity that they come with. Of course, the first day you're in a violation or the first occurrence in the sport, your school gets a $500 fine and your team loses a practice and a preseason scrimmage. If it happens for 2 days or for a second time in the sport, it is a $500 fine. You lose 2 days of practice and you're limited to 1 scrimmage, and you cannot host any events, and you cannot be the home team in the playoffs. Now, hosting any events means any invitationals, tournaments, jamborees, etc. You can host regular season contests, but you cannot host anything that deals with a showcase, a tournament, a jamboree, or an invitational. And again, the big kick here is you cannot be the home team in the playoffs. This does not matter what your record is. Third day in violation or a third occurrence in the sport is a $500 fine. You're going to lose 3 days of practice. You can't host any events outside of regular season contest, and you are not going to be allowed to participate in the playoffs regardless of what your record is. Outside teams, this is new this year, the wording to it. We've called it in the past the 75% rule. We now are referring to this as the allowable starters rule. What is new is that in most sports, you have an increase in the numbers that you are allowed to work with on an outside team. And of course, that number now is limited to the number that you would actually physically start your contest on the very first play of the game. It has nothing to do with how many you could sub in or how many different starters you would have. It is how many you start the contest with. The only exceptions would be in the sport of competitive cheer, swimming, and track and field. You are limited to 15 athletes. Certainly the number that you could start with goes much higher than 15, but the committee that was charged with looking at this decided that it was best to keep that number at 15. Every other sport, you no longer have to worry about what your 75% number is. What you need to know is, what do you start the contest with? That is your number to work with on an outside team. And of course, this number only applies to players who are on an outside team and who were listed on your eligibility and dressed for a varsity contest during the previous season. And again, that team is coached by a coach from your school. So again, the above number references those that were on eligibility and dressed for a varsity contest during the previous season, and is on an outside team coached by a coach from your school. Okay, another new change for the 2022 school year is the allowable scrimmages. Schools, you can substitute a scrimmage for your jamboree now. So varsity teams, you're allowed one of the two following. You're either allowed 2 scrimmages and 1 jamboree, or you're allowed 3 scrimmages. Sub-varsity teams, you have 1 scrimmage and 1 jamboree, or 2 scrimmages. There's no opportunity to add additional jamboree, and certainly if you choose to do a jamboree and you're a varsity team, you are only allowed 2 scrimmages. So that is a change. There were some sports that quite honestly did not utilize a jamboree, nor is a jamboree something they would get any benefit out of. Therefore, This handbook review committee we had recommended giving the flexibility to sports and coaches to trade their jamboree in for an additional scrimmage. Okay, another new change for the 2022 school year is the allowable scrimmages. Schools, you can substitute a scrimmage for your jamboree now. So varsity teams, you're allowed one of the two following. You're either allowed 2 scrimmages and 1 jamboree, or you're allowed 3 scrimmages. Sub-varsity teams, you have 1 scrimmage and 1 jamboree, or 2 scrimmages. There's no opportunity to add additional jamboree, and certainly if you choose to do a jamboree and you're a varsity team, you are only allowed 2 scrimmages. So that is a change. There were some sports that quite honestly did not utilize a jamboree, nor is a jamboree something they would get any benefit out of. Therefore, this handbook review committee we had recommended giving the flexibility to sports and coaches to trade their jamboree in for an additional scrimmage. Bench Bad Behavior is a national campaign by the NFHS that began to address behavior of folks as it pertained to officiating, has grown to behavior in general of all parties at our athletic events, coaches, players, spectators. Message we're trying to share is that we need to make sure that our coaches are taking ownership of their players, their coaching staffs, and set the expectations for your program at the beginning of the year. Of course, we don't want to see any unsportsmanlike conduct from spectators either, but we understand there's certain spectators you cannot control. But you can have an influence on those that are in your program, and we encourage you to do so. Very beginning of the year, parent meeting. Set the expectations for your programs, what we expect, what we don't expect, how we expect you to behave, and hold those people accountable to those expectations. Conversely, you need to make sure that you're modeling those behaviors throughout the year and setting that example for all in your program to follow. Officiating. Of course, remember, officials are hired to do a job, which is to officiate the contest and be the most neutral party that they can be throughout the contest. In our state, in the sport of baseball, we've got officials that are really good. They do a really good job most every time they're on the field. We've got officials that are average, and we've got officials that are below average, that do a below average job every time they're on the field. Occasionally, our below average officials do a tremendous job. And occasionally, our exceptional officials do a below average job. So keep in mind that it's going to be inconsistent. There's going to be times when it's inconsistent, but what we want is consistency inside the inconsistency. In other words, if we're inconsistent game to game, that's one thing. What we don't want is inconsistency pitch to pitch or inside the same game. So if you have issues with officiating, please notify your director, and also please contact me. If you have any issues of unprofessional behavior by our officials, then notify me so that we can address those as soon as possible. Some other thoughts? We have no such thing as a joint practice. That is considered a scrimmage. The league staff cannot change a rule. The persons that work in the league office, we don't have the ability or capability to just change a rule. Although there may be times we wish we could, we don't have that capability. We don't have a vote in the rules. League staff, we don't get the opportunity to enforce what we want to enforce. We enforce what the rules require us to enforce. We don't get to choose which rule we're not going to enforce this year or not right now, or which school we're not going to enforce it to. If you know something, say something. This is becoming a bigger and bigger deal. Too many times in passing, people want to say, well, I know this isn't right, and I know this isn't happening, or this is happening at this school, but I don't want to be the one that says something. I don't want to hurt the kid. Well, in that case, you're not hurting that kid that's not eligible or not supposed to be doing what they're doing, or that school that's not following the rule, but you're hurting everybody else that is. So keep that in mind. If you turn it in, we're going to investigate it. If there's substantial information and substantial evidence that points to a violation, we're going to address it. If we can validate it and verify it, we're going to address it. If we can't validate, verify, or substantiate, it's going to be hard for us to address it just because somebody says it's happening. Reminder, just because you got paperwork to enroll at school doesn't make the kid eligible. Games, you may need to make adjustments to the lack of available officials. This would be most consistent with game times. So before you and baseball go and set a date for a rainout to be made up, make sure you've scheduled with your officials director that they have officials available for that date. Amendments to pitch counts. If you throw on 2 consecutive days, the third day you must sit. This is amendment to Rule 3. So there's no opportunity for a pitcher to throw on 3 consecutive days anymore. In the past, you've been able to throw on 3 consecutive days, provided your 2 consecutive day total allowed the third day for you to be eligible. Now what we're saying is if you throw on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're definitely sitting out that day. Now, that 1 day required rest is inclusive of the number of days the athlete is required to sit out based on that 2-day pitch total. So if your Monday, Tuesday total says you must have 2 days rest, of course, we know you have to sit Wednesday because you can't throw 3 consecutive days. Thursday would be your second day of full rest, which means you'd be eligible to come back and throw on Friday. We've also added into that pitch count of Rule 3 that if you do throw on 2 consecutive days, the maximum number you can throw on the second day is 75 pitches. And that's provided that you threw 30 pitches or less on day 1. So if I throw Monday for 30 pitches, I'm eligible to pitch on Tuesday. The most I have on Tuesday is 75. If I exceed 75, then I'll have a violation of the pitch count rules. Two other changes to the league's rules and regulations for baseball is that we've added, these are both at the sub-varsity level, we've added a time limit. No new inning will start after 2 hours, and a drop-dead time of 2.5 hours for 7-inning games. The only exception to this will be we will finish the batter at the drop-dead. We will not kill a game in the middle of an at-bat. And, of course, for 5-inning games, we won't start a new inning after an hour and a half, and we'll have a drop-dead total of 2 hours. Sub-varsity baseball is also allowed an extra hitter. What this means is you can bat with 10 hitters in the order. The only caveat to this is that if you use an extra hitter, this is for offense only. That extra hitter cannot move to the field. They can't move to pitch. They can't pinch run. And you can't move anybody from the field or pitcher into that slot. The only person you can move into that slot would be an eligible sub. So again, you use an extra hitter, it's a hitter only. There's no exceptions to not having a hitter in the lineup or moving that hitter somewhere else in the order. A few other reminders for you. Wilson baseballs must be used in the playoffs. Of course, profanity's on the rise. We'll talk about that in our point of emphasis. And then assistant coaches, reminder, they do not get the 3-step ejection process. We do not recognize them as getting the 3-step ejection process. And FHS rule changes this year. These are changes to the playing rules that we follow. The first rule here is dealing with player communication equipment. This rule is essentially saying that if you're wearing a wristband, if you're going to wear wristbands, it's got to be worn on the wrist. If you're a wristband guy, you like to put wristbands on your team, to call out offensive and or defensive signals. They can no longer wear this wristband in their back pocket or on their belt. It must be worn on their wrist. Of course, with that wristband, of course, everybody can wear it. Pitchers, if they do wear it, it cannot be the colors of white or gray, and it cannot be considered distracting. That white card inside the black wristband may be considered distracting if the batter and or official or the home plate umpire are seeing it on every pitch. A simple solution to that is turn that wristband to the inside of the wrist so that you can't see it from home plate. If it's still deemed distracting, they may be asking the pitcher to remove it. Reminder, the wristbands worn on the wrist do not have to match the sleeve color of the uniform or any of the school colors as well. Again, just to reiterate, that communication equipment shall be worn on a player's wrist or forearm. Pitchers have to wear it on their non-pitching arm. Penalty for this: first time there's a violation, it's a team warning. Will be issued to the head coach on behalf of the entire team. The second time there's a violation in that contest, the offender or offenders and the head coach will all be ejected. Next rule change is dealing with electronic communication. It's now legal for a one-way electronic communication from the dugout to the catcher for the purpose of calling pitches. Again, this is a one-way device where the dugout is talking or texting and the catcher is on the receiving end to be able to see or hear what is being relayed in for the purpose of calling pitches. The coach cannot be outside the dugout or bench area, and under no circumstance can it be anything that allows the catcher to talk back. There's no other player on the field, offense or defense, that can have this electronic communication device just to listen in. Again, just to reiterate, it's for the purpose of calling pitches. Now, we understand, yes, that coach is probably going to say, hey, first and third, we're going to throw through. Catcher steps out, gives signal. Hey, bunt coverage, 2. Catcher steps out, gives signal. We understand that. What we're trying to eliminate is the idea that you take time as you send the catcher out to talk to the pitcher, and through the catcher you are relaying communication for what the pitcher needs to do to try not to burn a visit. We're also trying to eliminate any possibility that we're communicating from the dugout to the umpire through the catcher. If those things happen, then we're in violation of the rule. Of course, again, coaches, you must be in the dugout at all times and using that one-way electronic communication device. And again, you cannot use that device to communicate with any other team member on defense or any other team member when on offense. Again, dugout to catcher only. First offense, it's going to be a warning, team warning. Second offense is going to be a ejection of the players and the head coach. Now, we'll share with you, I've already instructed our signers throughout the state, the first team warnings that we issue for this violation, I want to be notified immediately. I'm going to send a letter to your school. The second time you're issued a team warning, and this year we're going to address that as unsportsmanlike conduct to the school. And that way we can cut out people who want to try to get away with it every game until they get their warning. You're going to basically get one free warning this year trying to allow more than the catcher to use electronic communication. After that one free warning, then we're going to address it on our end. Next rule change is dealing with the umpire in chief. This is pretty simple. In the rule book, it allowed the umpires to basically declare a forfeit for any infractions by the spectators, coaches, players, or team bench personnel. What we've done is we've scratched out the word spectators because essentially that should be a home team administration, and spectators shouldn't be able to control whether the game will be played or not from the umpire's decision. Coaching rule, this is essentially the same thing with the electronic communication we've talked about, because the way the rule book is written, you've got what is allowed by players to be used equipment-wise and then what coaches can do. And we had to address that coaches can use that one-way electronic communication into the dugout, or from the dugout, apologize. Our 2024 points of emphasis. Now, these are not rule changes. These are particular points that we want to make to say, hey, we're going to emphasize this with everybody this year, and hopefully we can clean some of the issues with these rules up as we have been seeing in the last few years. First one is malicious contact. Remember, in baseball, there are times where there are plays that happen where we have collisions, and those are considered train wrecks. We don't always have every collision is not necessarily malicious. You know, we've got a ground ball to short, batter runner is trying to run through first. The throw takes the first baseman up the line. He leaves his feet and jumps into the baseline at the same time the batter runner gets there. We have a collision, bodies go flying, it looks violent, it looks terrible, somebody may get hurt, but that's a train wreck. It was unavoidable. Neither one had opportunity or ample time to avoid that contact or that collision. Remember, malicious can be either offensive or defensive. It doesn't necessarily just pertain to the offensive player. Another example of that train wreck would be coming into home plate. Throw takes the catcher up the line. The runner and the catcher both get to the same spot at the same time, and bam, we have a violent collision there at home plate. Not necessarily intentional by either. Neither had the opportunity to avoid that. It's a train wreck. It happens. It's unfortunate. We're not looking for it. For it to be malicious and rise to the level where we've got malicious and somebody needs to be ejected, remember that contact or that collision is unavoidable, or is avoidable. I apologize. We have the ability to avoid it. And it is also considered excessive, and then also we have an intent to injure. So there's a couple different factors the official has to weigh in determining if whether or not it is malicious. The first one is, was this avoidable? If it was avoidable and then we have excessive contact, we don't even need to worry about whether there was intent to injure. We had an avoidable opportunity, and then we used excessive force in that contact. That's malicious. Kid needs to be ejected. Okay? So you take those three pieces together. Usually if the two of them are together, then we've got a problem in terms of malicious contact. Just because some of those are not there doesn't mean we don't have malicious contact. But again, we go back to that's kind of our starting point of determining whether we have it or not. Second point of emphasis is going to be profanity. I think if in our state, if we could eliminate the number of baseball players that were ejected last year for profanity and or disrespectful comments or remarks to a game official on a strike or ball call at home plate, we probably would have had less than 5 baseball ejections last year. So if you think about that, if we eliminate profanity and our comments or nonverbal actions towards home plate umpires, we probably have less than 5 baseball ejections in our entire state. That's with many of you, close to 200 schools playing 20 to 26 games in the regular season alone. That's a lot of baseball games, a lot of kids playing with very minimal issues. Unfortunately, we don't have that. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of issues where we had profanity last year. So profanity, we can have direct or indirect. In some cases, indirect profanity is heard because we say it out loud directly in the air, and it's unavoidable. Our officials have to understand there is a difference. When you say it directly to them, there are no opportunities for them to kind of not hear it. When you say it indirectly away from them, a lot of it's going to depend on the tone and the volume of how it's said. in any case, when profanity is muttered on the field, we have an opportunity to eject the player and or coach. So understand, if your athletes don't want to put their potential next few games of eligibility in jeopardy, then they don't need to utter any profane words on the baseball field. Whether they're talking to themselves, talking to their buddy, or they're just in frustration saying it so nobody else can hear it. If they utter that profane word out loud and that official hears it, this athlete is going to be done. And they've risked the opportunity to not be eligible and to be ejected by uttering those words. Pace of play, we've got a 20-second time limit. Just like we see pitch clocks at other levels of baseball, we've had a 20 seconds to be in the box and ready to hit, or 20 seconds from the time we receive the baseball to being on the rubber ready to pitch and delivering that pitch on the mound. That's been in our rule book in the Federation for high school baseball since the 1970s. What we've got to see is that we're trying to use preventative umpire measures. We're trying to say, hey, we want to keep a reasonable pace and a reasonable rhythm. We're trying to avoid the constant stepping out, taking batting gloves on and off, getting 5 and 6 signals, 20 practice swings, getting back in. We're trying to avoid the shortstop, then the third baseman, now the catcher coming halfway to talk to the pitcher between pitches. We're not looking for a situation where we want officials to call balls and strikes. We're looking to say, hey, let's keep this game moving a little bit faster. So we get back to pace of play again here. Now we're talking about between innings. Again, we got 1 minute 20 seconds by rule. Common sense applies. We don't have stopwatches out. We're not going back to a stopwatch for 20 seconds. We don't have pitch clocks. We don't have visible play clocks here. What we got is we got an approximate time. We want to keep this thing to as close as 1 minute and 20 seconds. Now, there's several parties that play a role in this. Number one, officials. Officials play a role. Officials don't have time to go back to the backstop and talk to people, talk to each other between innings, stand over there, go to the dugout and get things from coaches or have conversations, allow for 15 warm-up pitches. We want to kind of keep this thing moving. Coaches, get your kids on and off the field. The constant talking and group gatherings are great, but be quick and to the point in your conversations with your players so that we can keep this pace moving. And then we got the players. They got to get out there and they got to get ready. Now, we recognize that in high school baseball, your pitchers and your catchers, they often hit. And sometimes you don't want to run for them because they are your best athletes. So it's going to be a little bit more time for them to kind of get dressed and get out. Going to be a little more time for your pitcher to get his glove and his hat and get out there on the mound. But we also know that's not going to happen every single inning. So we want to keep that game moving. What we're looking for is we can keep this thing to as close to 1 minute and 20 seconds every half inning and not 3 to 3.5 minutes. If we can knock 2 to 3 minutes off every half inning and do that 14 times in a baseball game, we can eliminate a considerable amount of dead time in that contest. Again, we've got in Rule 731 situations where it's spelled out when the batters can leave the batter's box, constantly stepping out to alter that rhythm or to delay the game. That's not acceptable. And then we've got to apply that proper penalty. Again, this is an officiating common sense thing here. Like, we want some common sense. We want to make sure that we're not looking to call balls and strikes. They're giving us no other option to call balls and strikes for these type of violations of this delaying the game, essentially. Continue with the POE. Umpires consistent. Game to game, inning to inning, half inning to half inning, team to team. Don't give one team, well, this kid's a potential first rounder, I need to give him more than 6 pitches to get loose. No. If you're going to give the potential first rounder 6 pitches, then you need to give the potential last pick to the varsity team 6 pitches as well. So, be consistent pitch to pitch so that we don't have a lot of confusion and this being misapplied throughout our state. And finally, coaches, excessive player conferences. Don't be surprised this year if the umpire says, no, right here, stay here, catcher. No, go back to short. Let's play baseball. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for 3.5, 4-hour high school baseball games. We're looking to play at a nice, brisk pace to keep the game moving and to be respectful of everybody at the same time in doing so. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me here at the office. Again, my name's Charlie Winsky. Appreciate your time, and I wish you best of luck this baseball season.